Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this session and welcome in. Now, if this was an in-person session, I'd ordinarily have started by asking everyone here a little bit about, what they understand about insider trading and what are their concepts about the insider trading regulations formulated by SEBI, etc. Now, since we have a situation here where only I will be doing the speaking, at least for some part of the time, let me do my other favorite thing here, which is begin with a couple of stories. Now, both the stories that I'm going to be talking about are set in 1996, about 4 years after the securities market regulator of our country, the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI as it is more popularly known, came out with the SEBI Prohibition of Insider Trading Regulations of 1992. Now, one story is the takeover of ABS Industries Limited, a listed company, by Bayer AG. And the other is the story of the purchase of shares of Brook Bond Lipton India Limited, another listed company, by what was then known as Hindustan Lever Limited and is now known as Hindustan Unilever Limited. Now, in the HUL story, pretty simple, straight out, approximately 8 lakh shares of Brook Bond were bought by Hindustan Lever from UTI barely 2 weeks before an announcement was made regarding the proposed merger of Brook Bond and HLL. Now, it's important to note here that both Hindustan Lever and Brook Bond were subsidiaries of the UK company Unilever and shared common directors, some management in common. And before this acquisition of shares had taken place, there had been some vague speculative reports, newspaper reports about a potential merger that might take place between Brook Bond and HLL. So that's the first story. And the second story, when it opens in 1996, it opens with a certain Mr. Rakesh Agarwal, the CEO of ABS Industries, who was at that point of time engaged in negotiations with Bayer AG to kind of get into some sort of a technical collaboration with Bayer. And obviously the discussions were successful. And in October of 1996, Bayer came out with a public offer asking the shareholders of ABS for 20% of the shares of ABS. The condition attached to that deal was that if that 20% acquisition did not happen, or if from the open offer they did not get the 20% shares that they were looking to acquire, then the whole deal would be off. Now, as it happened, they did get the 20% shares and the deal went through and ABS Industries became Bayer ABS Limited. The interesting part comes in a couple of years later when SEBI, in the course of an investigation, found that whilst all of this happened in October, this whole thing of acquisition by Bayer, etc., in September, a certain gentleman called Mr. I.P. Kedia, who happened to be the brother-in-law of Mr. Rakesh Agarwal, had been quietly acquiring shares of ABS Industries from the market. And not only that, these shares and the acquisition of the shares was financed by Mr. Rakesh Agarwal. Also, what was found was that these shares were subsequently sold by Mr. Kedia to Bayer in the open offer at a significant profit. So in both of these cases, which is HUL as well as ABS, SEBI made a case of insider trading, saying that, because there was a shared management between Hindustan Lever and Brook Bond, Hindustan Lever was aware of the impending merger, and to that extent, the purchase of shares of Brook Bond from UTI just about a couple of weeks before the merger was motivated by this inside knowledge that they had. And similarly, in the case of ABS, they said that Mr. Kedia, who was a part of the management of ABS, was well aware of this ongoing discussion regarding the technical collaboration with Bayer. And he had therefore gone ahead and bought those shares and sold them based on that inside knowledge. The common thread in both of these stories, if you will, is the fact that people who were engaged in the buying of shares did so on the basis of information that was available only to them, or at least that was what SEBI's allegation was. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of how these cases finally panned out, because we're not doing a case study here, but this kind of, serves to highlight how insider trading, or trading on the basis of information that is not generally available to everyone, can take many forms, right? So, and this concept is really what we're going to talk about. And what really came to be highlighted in these two cases, which kind of were the landmark cases in relation to insider trading at that time, was that even though we had a law in place at the time, there were gaping loopholes in that law. And over time, there were several committees that were set up, and there was this general discussion on how, instead of having a punitive law, which basically is a law which says that, look, you have gone and done this and this is wrong, and therefore this is the penalty you need to face. Instead of that sort of a legal system, how we need to move to something which is more preventive, so that, we're not left with a situation where we're dealing with the aftermath of someone having traded on the basis of insider trading, insider information, where basically we are in a position to kind of prevent insider trading. So all of this came together over nearly a couple of decades and culminated in SEBI scrapping the 1992 regulations in 2015 to come up with the brand new SEBI Prohibition of Insider Trading regulations. And those regulations are really what we're going to be talking about in this session. Now, at the outset, I have to tell you this, that, in this hour-long session, there is no way we're going to be able to kind of really get into the depths and nuances of what the regulations talk about. But what we will try and do in this 1 hour is we will kind of scratch the surface, try and understand the main principles, and get like a broad understanding of what the regulations really are talking about. So let's get started. And I know I've been talking about insider trading a couple of times, and because we're all we have some idea of what the regulations are, or we're all lawyers, etc. So, of course, I think it's fair to assume that we all have a basic idea of what insider trading is and what the insider trading regulations are. But I am just going to kind of put this down as a concept here right now so that we are all on the same page, right? So let's say you and I are shareholders of a listed company, right? And I have certain information that you as a shareholder of that same company do not have access to, right? Now, if I was to trade on the basis of that information, I would have a little bit of an edge over you in terms of my decision making, right? So if the information that I have tells me that I need to hold on to shares whilst you are probably selling shares because you don't have that kind of information. Or if my information tells me that, it's best to get out of the company as soon as I can, whilst you continue to hold the shares because, again, you don't have that information, then I am the insider who's dealing in the shares of a company on the basis of information that you as an ordinary shareholder don't have. And that is what is sought to be prevented by the Prohibition of Insider Trading regulations, right? So now, if I was to really take the 2015 regulations and filter down the regulations into one single sentence, really that sentence would be, no insider shall trade in the securities of a listed company whilst in the possession of unpublished price-sensitive information. Simple, right? Logical as well. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I am going to put this, I'm just going to share my screen and open a blank document and put down this crux of the regulations, as I said, and then we will, because this is something that we will kind of keep coming back to, right? And we will explore each of these points in detail. There we have it. That's the fundamental principle of what we are saying is what we are saying is the fundamental principle of the insider trading regulations, that no insider can trade in the securities of a listed entity whilst in the possession of unpublished price sensitive information. So what are the key components of this statement? An insider cannot trade in the securities of a listed entity whilst in the possession of unpublished price sensitive information, right? So we'll just quickly try and go through each of these concepts one by one. What I will do is I will run through the relevant provisions of the insider trading regulations whilst we are at it. And we'll discuss both of these as we go along. The first thing that we'll start with, of course, is insider. Now, who's an insider? Talking about the definition in the insider trading regulations, an insider is simply someone who's a connected person or someone who may or may not be a connected person, but is in possession of or has access to unpublished price sensitive information. Now I can go to this a very long and complicated definition because of course it's a legal definition. But if I was to simplify this, simply put, connected person is any person who presently has an association with a listed entity or has had in the past 6 months any association with a listed entity, which can be direct or indirect. Please note, this is important. So you can have a direct connection, you can have an indirect connection. It can be a present connection, or it could be a connection which took place. I mean, you had an interaction about 6 months ago, because of which or through which now you could be employed. There could be a contractual relationship, there could be an employment relationship, anything. You could be a director, officer. The short point is, if that relationship gives you or can reasonably be expected to give you access to unpublished price sensitive information, then you are a connected person. So going back to the definition of insider, basically we are again talking about anyone who either has access, who because of their equation with a company has access to unpublished price sensitive information, or for any other reason really has access to unpublished price sensitive information. Such a person is an insider. So here we are. So unpublished price sensitive information. Now again, there are a couple of components to it, and it's a slightly convoluted definition, but let's take it part by part and see how we do. So unpublished price sensitive information means any information relating to a company or its securities that is not generally available, which upon becoming available is likely to materially affect the price of the securities. Okay, this is the substantive part of our definition. Going back to our ABS Industries story, Mr. Kedia, when he was acquiring the shares of ABS Limited, he had the information that there is this ongoing discussion between ABS and Bayer for a technical collaboration agreement. He also had the further knowledge that Bayer AG, the German company, as a principle, does not enter into any technology sharing arrangements with any company where it does not hold a 51% stake. In fact, this was one of the arguments that they had put forward at the SAT, saying that, look, we didn't do this whole buying and selling to kind of get a personal gain. We just wanted to really ensure that Bayer didn't have a chance to walk away from the deal just because it didn't get the 20% shares that it needed to get to that 51% holding, which was necessary for us to go ahead with the deal. So really, this whole buying and selling that we did of the ABS shares was to ensure that we were able to fulfill the requirements placed by Bayer. So to that extent, going back to the definition here, there was information that Mr. Kedia had, which was not generally available at that time, but which, if it was made generally available to the public, people would have realized, going back to 1996, that this was the time when people really needed to build strength, like small-ish Indian companies needed to build strength to be able to survive, and possibly tying up with an offshore company was a way to build that strength. So people would have realized that ABS Limited was a serious player and was here to stay. And that would have translated into the securities of ABS becoming more expensive, right? So if that information that Mr. Kedia had, if it became generally available, it would have certainly materially affected the price of the securities. So going back to the question of ABS, did Mr. Kedia trade on the basis of unpublished price sensitive information? If we are to go by this this definition, he certainly did. But just to kind of complete the loop on this, we will go look at another definition, which is the definition of generally available, which has also been specifically defined in the regulations to talk about information that is accessible to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. So short point, when we are talking about unpublished price sensitive information, if you as a shareholder have access to any information that is not available to any other person without having to work really hard for it or be in a special situation where, you know, they're either associated with the company or whatever else. And if that information that you hold, that when it becomes publicly available will materially change the price of the company or is likely to change the price of that of the shares of that company, what you have is UPSI, right? Okay, so now that is what we mean. That is the second definition that we covered. We've covered the main ones: insider and unpublished price sensitive information. The other ones are really like simple. So we'll take them one by one and then we'll move to the next segment. The next is of course listed entity. This is a simple one, right? Because, you know, anyone who shares, any company whose shares are listed on the stock exchanges. Yes, that's right. But that is not the only definition. The twist here is that when we are talking about listed securities, we also talk about securities of companies whose shares are not presently listed, but are proposed to be listed. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I as a company am thinking of doing an IPO, then my shares are proposed to be listed? No. If I have actually filed an offer document with SEBI, or I'm in the process of actually doing an IPO, that is when my shares will be referred to as proposed to be listed, and I therefore, and anyone associated, I therefore will come within the ambit, I as a company will come within the ambit of insider trading regulations, and anyone associated with me will then come within the ambit of insider. And the last definition we want to look at is trade. So trading, of course, talks about buying, selling, subscribing, and dealing in shares. Now, buying, selling, subscribing is pretty straightforward, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But what does dealing in securities mean? Dealing in securities literally means in any manner entering into any sort of a deal involving securities. And if you look at the explanatory note, which at the end of the relevant definition, it says that, you know, the idea is to keep the definition of dealing as wide as possible. So, you know, activities which relate to securities but which are not strictly buying and selling or subscribing, such as pledging, and this is the important one that we want to look at, such as pledging will also be considered to be trading. So if you are pledging the shares of a listed company whilst in the possession of unpublished price sensitive information, that too constitutes a violation of the statement that we first set out here, and assuming of course that you're an insider, that no insider can trade in the securities of a listed entity whilst in the possession of unpublished price sensitive information. So really that is a very, very simplified crux of what the regulations say. Now, before we delve deeper into the regulations, I'd just like to take a minute to kind of understand who should be looking at the insider trading regulations, like who needs to be concerned about it, right? Now, and in that, I would like to say that, you know, this these regulations, the insider trading regulations are unique compared to all other SEBI regulations, because whether you take the Depository Act or whether you take the stockbrokers or the portfolio managers or whatever else it is, normally regulations are like a conversation between SEBI, the regulator, and the intermediary saying, if you want to seek registration, you come in, you fill in this form, you pay me this fee. This is, once you get registered, this is what you can do. This is what you can't do. I will come in, I will conduct inspections when I want, etc., etc. So that is the general tenor of all SEBI regulations, if you've ever gone through any SEBI regulations. But the insider trading regulations are different in that they don't talk about a particular class of people. This is one set of regulations which goes out and talks to the public at large. So anyone who qualifies as an insider will therefore be concerned about, or should be concerned about, the regulations. And therefore, there are often very, very different viewpoints of what you're interested in the regulation, depending on who you are and what is your perspective when you are looking at those regulations. So we'll just quickly run through who are the main categories of people who will really be affected by or concerned about the regulation. An employee of a listed entity, right? Because an employee of a listed entity is most likely to have access to UPSI. So let's say you have dealt with UPSI. What does a violation of the insider trading regulations look like? Now, any violation of the insider trading regulations can be of two types, right? One is we are looking at a situation where you as an insider have access to UPSI and you are actually trading on the basis of the UPSI, right? And the second category is where you as an insider have access to the UPSI and you are not trading yourself in the on the basis of the UPSI, but you are sharing the information or permitting the information to be shared with someone else who may potentially in the future trade on the basis of the information. So violations of the insider trading regulations can really come in two buckets. One, actual trading whilst in the possession of UPSI, and second, sharing UPSI. Now, it doesn't matter whether the person who you've shared it with actually trades on the basis of it, doesn't trade on the basis of it. The fact is that you shared the UPSI, right? And this goes back to the discussion that we had that, the emphasis was on moving to a more preventive sort of regulatory framework where we were looking to prevent insider trading rather than wait for a situation where insider trading had already kind of happened, right? So these are the two main categories of violations. Now, given that, we'll go back to the discussion that we were having on who needs to really look at the insider trading regulations. So coming back to the first category that we talked about, which is employees of listed companies. Simply because, they are most likely to have information which is going to be unpublished price sensitive information. And to that extent, they are very likely to be insiders. So that, they are never in a position where they can be charged for having shared UPSI when they were not supposed to have shared that UPSI. They are the ones who really need to be very, very careful and very thoroughly cognizant of the provisions of the insider trading regulations. Now, fortunately, all listed companies have an insider trading code, which more or less mirrors the insider trading regulations. So that generally becomes like the Bible for all employees of listed companies. The second category is the common man. R.K. Lakshman might or might not approve of our use of this term, but we'll just go ahead with it anyway. So the common man, what do I mean? This is not a professional investor. This is a person who has a regular stable job or a business or whatever. And whenever they have some extra money, they just go ahead and invest. And so basically it's so infrequent that they would generally not really be keeping a watch on what this financial cycle of a company is when they declare their results, etc., etc. And they are also therefore very unlikely to really have any sort of unpublished price sensitive information. So do these people really need to care? The answer sadly is it depends. Now, why do I say that? Because let's say they themselves they have their own business. So they are definitely not employees of any listed company, but let's say they're spouses. And the way it works is the way the regulations have been defined. Insider, apart from the definition that I read out to you, which is that, anyone who has an association with the company which gives them access to certain information, some people are deemed to be insiders by virtue of their association with insiders. Now, spouses, for example, children who are financially dependent on the insiders, or parents who are financially dependent on insiders. In case of non-individuals, like a promoter or a subsidiary. In case of a mutual fund, the trustee. All of these will be deemed to be insiders, right? So if this common man that we're talking about is one of these deemed insiders, then too they will come within the ambit, and they need to be careful that they are not in a position where they have ever helped in the dissemination of UPSI or traded on the basis of something that might be considered to be UPSI, right? So that's the second category we're talking about. The third category is, of course, lawyers. And here is where I'd like to spend a little bit of time. Of course, as lawyers, most of the times when we look at regulations, it's generally based on the fact matrix that the client sets out in front of us, because generally we are looking at the regulations to try and kind of figure out how to advise our client. So obviously that will have precedence, but that apart, there are also some other situations where, we need to kind of look at the regulations and see how they impact us. What are those situations? First, for example, let's say you have been approached by a private equity client who tells you that, look, we are looking to invest in a listed company, which is colloquially what is known as a PIPE deal, a private investment in a public enterprise or public entity. So basically it's a listed company. They are looking at taking some sort of a shareholding in that listed entity, and as a starting point for all sorts of transactions, you as their lawyer are required to do their diligence. Now, as we lawyers always do, we send them like a 30-40 page laundry list of questions saying, this is our checklist, please answer it. And then, basis the answers that we receive, we will go ahead and start our diligence. And you receive a one-line answer from the target saying, I am sorry, all of this constitutes unpublished price sensitive information. We cannot share any information with you. Please go ahead and do your diligence on the basis of whatever information is publicly available. We are not going to give you even one line. What do? Then again is when we will go back to the definition of UPSI, right? Now, obviously the target company wants to play it safe because they don't want to be in a situation where they are said to be breaching the law, right? But your client also wants the maximum information that they can get before, so that they can make some sort of an informed decision on whether they want to invest in the company or not. So then it becomes our job as the lawyers to kind of try and tread the fine line of trying to get the maximum information that we can, and whilst also ensuring that no one needs to go to jail for this, because that's a little high price to pay. But yeah, so that is when we will need to come back and look at the definition of UPSI. See what can be covered, what will not be covered, go back into each of the elements constituting that definition of UPSI, and I'll just put out the, and we just discussed the definition, like, is it generally available? Is it something that is likely to materially change the price? Is there any other way to rebut the presumption that this is going to be price sensitive? These are the things that we as lawyers will then need to consider to be able to advise our clients. Then there is another situation that we want to talk about, which is that, there is this one listed entity which we advise absolutely regularly, right? You pretty much handle all their board minutes, you draft their minutes, you draft their shareholder minutes, you kind of do their structure notes for all the transactions that they're looking at undertaking. You help the management put together the board notes for taking, proposed transactions or pitches to the management, to the board for their approval. So basically you're like involved from the get-go in everything that this listed entity does. Then can you then say, oh, but I am not actually a part of the company. I am not actually an employee of the company. And therefore, to that extent, I I'm not really an insider. Unfortunately, that defense is not available to us any longer. So that's when it becomes important for us as lawyers to look at the definition again of an insider. And also, in fact, the insider trading regulations, when they were amended last year in a series of amendments, the listed entity and also the compliance officer of the listed entity has been given the explicit power to extend the provisions of the insider trading code of the relevant company to these intermediaries as well, like people like us, lawyers, people like bankers, people like auditors, people who advise a listed entity on a regular basis. So, you know, these kind of people, we, even though technically we are not insiders, though we are definitely connected persons, but you know, we can be brought within the ambit of insiders. So to that extent, as lawyers, we need to analyze the impact of the insider trading regulations and the code of the relevant company. So for example, let's say, just naming some listed companies, let's say, you know, as a lawyer, I advise HDFC Bank and some other listed companies, and, you know, Hindustan Lever, like 5 other companies. I might potentially very well find myself on the insider list of all 5 of those companies. So the reality might be that, you know, I might end up in a situation which is far more stringent than what most of the employees of those companies face, but that's just how it works. So that's another way in which we, that's another set of, like, that's another angle or lens from which we need to look at the regulations. And of course, the last, the most self-explanatory, but, you know, also the most onerous, is if you are, or if you happen to be part of the compliance team of a listed entity, and it is your job to ensure that, you know, people are in compliance with the insider trading, not people, the company is in compliance with the insider trading regulations. So then, of course, the regulations have gone into great detail about what a listed company needs to do, what a compliance officer needs to do, what they cannot do, what are the powers available to them. All of that is set out. But the challenge really becomes at that point of time, and that's why I'm picking up this point more than anything else, that, you know, it becomes a challenge to tread that fine line between wanting to do all that is required to protect the interests of the company and also respecting the privacy of the insiders or the employees. Okay, because, you know, you might want to ask for 20 things just to ensure that the company is fulfilling its obligations in relation to the insider trading regulations. But at what point of time do those questions stop being absolutely necessary and start getting into a space where you're infringing upon the privacy of the employees? So that's what you really need to be careful of. And that's when you're looking at the regulations as a part of a compliance team of a listed entity. So the lens you're looking, from which you're viewing the regulations become very, very different. So, you know, these are the 4 sets of lenses, in a way, from which you can consider the regulations. Now, we'll basis the brief discussion that we had on what the basic principle is of the insider trading regulations and what the violations can look like. Now, we discussed who are the various people, how they can become insiders, what does an insider mean. So here's the question, you know, what happens? And like we discussed also how lawyers can also potentially be insiders, right? Now, what happens if I am an insider? As an insider, there will typically be sort of threshold beyond which, so let's say if you are trading in shares, if you hold shares of that entity and you're trading in shares beyond that threshold limit, you will need to seek pre-clearances. In certain other situations, you will not be allowed to trade at all. So for example, 24 hours, so the period from 24 hours before the end of a financial year to 24 hours after the declaration of the financial results, that whole period, there can be no trading of any shares of a listed entity. That is what is referred to as the closed period, a closed trading window, or closure of the trading window. So now if you're an insider, during the closed trading window, you will not be allowed to trade. Then you will have to seek certain pre-clearances. You will have to make certain disclosures on an ongoing basis. And also the first time when this company, like let's say you are a new employee and you've just joined, as soon as you join, you will find a set of questionnaires that are sent to you by compliance saying, please let us know whether you hold any shares, whether your family holds any shares. And you know the kind of questions they'll often ask you, they will put the class 10th board results to shame. Like that is how extensive it gets, right? Like, you know, because they basically what they want to ascertain is if there is anyone else in your family who holds any shares or could potentially trade in shares, in which case they will kind of keep a watch because you are being designated an insider. So those are the kind of questions that you might kind of expect to face. There will of course be continual disclosures. Then you will of course have to deal with the share dealing code and the code of conduct that has been put in place by the company, which might also mean that, you know, there are certain, you follow certain protocols, you cannot do certain things without checking certain things. So that is really what it means for you to be an insider. Now, if that is what it means, now certain senior management or certain functions like accounts or legal and compliance, the way we've just discussed what insider means, these categories of people will, if you think about it, be always classified as insiders. Like, you know, the management obviously is completely clued in to every decision that the listed entity makes, is about to make, or is thinking of making. So does that mean that, you know, they can never share information, or they can never trade on in the shares that they hold? That is where we have to look at exceptions. Now, thankfully, the insider trading regulations have built in certain exceptions. If you are the kind of person who will be always considered to be an insider, then certain relaxations are built in for you. Let's say now we look at these relaxations also from the two perspectives of the two violations that we discussed. One is the violation regarding trading on the basis of unpublished price sensitive information, and the second is dissemination of the unpublished price sensitive information. So talking about trading, there are two ways of doing it. One is you can put in place a trading plan, right? A trading plan, very simply put, and I'm not going to get into details because it's, as it stands today, practically, I do not know of even a single instance where any listed entity has gone in for a trading plan, but theoretically it's a great relaxation to have. So therefore I'm going to tell you just a little bit about what it is. So a trading plan really is where at the beginning of a year, as an insider, you say that, okay, you know, I want to sell 100 shares in this company. Okay, I am going to sell 25 shares in March, I'm going to sell 25 shares in July, I'm going to sell 25 shares in August, and 25 shares in say November, right? This is how I'm going to sell my shares, and come hell or high water, the world goes here or there, you know, irrespective of whatever changes there might be in the share price of the company, this trading plan stands. So basically you can never, like, no one can ever come and allege that, you know, you traded on the basis of, oh, you know, you had some information that the price of the shares are going to go higher and therefore you traded on that basis. Because I mean, when you commit to certain timelines, you're taking an equal risk that the shares, the price of the shares could go lower and you would still be bound to sell, right? So the trading plan is one thing. I'm not going to get into further details because, like I told you, practically no one that I know of has ever really chosen a trading plan. The second is with a pre-clearance. Now, you remember the discussion that we had right at the beginning about how trading includes pledging as well. So now oftentimes what happens in a listed company is, you know, the employees hold shares. They've been granted shares because of ESOP or whatever else. And, you know, these shares are obviously fairly valuable, and they want to rely on, they want to kind of take a loan against these shares, or they have taken some financing to buy the shares, and these shares are security, whichever way, you know, there are multiple structures that exist in the market. So now in this case, when you're pledging the shares, okay, then there is this whole requirement which says that, so coming back to the discussion on pre-clearances, right? So let's say you want to, there is a legitimate reason, there is a genuine requirement of funds, okay, and you are an insider, you are in that category of insiders who will always have access to UPSI, but you genuinely have a requirement for funds, and the only way you want, the easiest way for you to go ahead and get the funds is if you pledge your shares. So the exception that has been built in the regulations is you go approval and then go ahead and pledge your shares. So that is the kind of flexibility that is available to you. Now, that is in terms of trading. The other bucket that I want to address, and I think we are kind of running short on time, so I'll just do this very, very quickly. The second bucket that we spoke about, which was a violation, was enabling someone to have access to or sharing with someone information that you know is UPSI. So as an insider, you have access to UPSI, you share that information with someone, or you enable the sharing of that information with someone, that also is a violation of the insider trading regulations. Now, if we go back to, go back to our discussion regarding a private investment in a public company, let's say the shoe's on the other foot and you are the person who is a part of the listed entity and you've received this checklist from the lawyer. Of course, you've sent out that first reply saying, this is all price sensitive information and we can't share any of this with you. But then your lawyer is one of those perseverant sorts and they come back and say, oh, but there is this exception and that exception and we've considered it and we still think you can give us ABC information. But if you were to strictly apply the insider trading regulations, you would still not be able to share the information because, any sharing of information or any enabling sharing of information of a listed company constitutes a violation, right? So in an amendment which was brought in sometime in mid-2019, there was an exception which was built in. And that exception says that all of this, or sharing or enabling the sharing of UPSI, is a violation except if it is done for a legitimate purpose. Now here is the very, very interesting question of what constitutes a legitimate purpose. Now that again has been left to discretion, but they do say, the regulations do say that, if there is legitimate or necessary sharing of information, or if there is sharing of UPSI in the ordinary course of business by an insider, with partners, collaborators, lenders, customers, suppliers, legal advisors, etc., that would amount to legitimate purpose. So long as that information has not been shared solely to circumvent the obligations under the PIT. So if it is limited for a diligence, that is legitimate purpose. It's fair to say that it's legitimate purpose, and as the company secretary of that listed entity, you can breathe easy and actually share that information. But there is a but that has been built in by the regulations themselves, which say that when you share that information with the other person, you have to make them aware that this is UPSI. And you have to maintain a database. You have to say that on so-and-so date, I shared so-and-so information with so-and-so person whose PAN number is so-and-so. That is literally what the database needs to say, right? And you have to make them aware that this is all insider trading, that this is all UPSI, and therefore the person with whom you have shared the information has also now become an insider. And that is how, going back to our earlier discussion, as lawyers, during a deal, we can often find ourselves becoming insiders of certain companies. That might not be a long-term thing. Like we might not be forever insiders. For example, like as in the case where we were advising, where we are advising companies on a regular basis, and we know pretty much everything about the company. So there we are insiders, and the compliance officer would be well within their reach to kind of extend the application of the share dealing code to us for good. But in these cases where information is being provided to us as part of legitimate purpose, and we are being informed that we are becoming insiders, then for the purposes of that transaction, for the purposes of that diligence, we would become insiders and be bound by the insider trading regulations vis-a-vis that company. So that, in a nutshell, really is what the insider trading regulations talk about. they do, I mean, I have of course not gone into a lot of detail. There is also a portion that I wanted to cover, which is something very similar to the whistleblower policy, which is something like an informant system that has been brought in December 2009. Which is that what are the consequences of insider trading in the private or non-listed companies? Now, like I said, you know, that if companies are not listed, then I mean, either your securities are listed or they are proposed to be listed. So if you do not fall into either of these categories, then really the insider trading regulations would not apply to you unless as an organization you become an insider. So if let's say it's an unlisted parent of a listed subsidiary or an unlisted subsidiary of a listed parent, and therefore you are deemed to be an insider. So in that case, the lens you will view it from will be as an insider. You're not the company charged with ensuring compliance as the listed entity then. You are then looking at what happens as an insider, right? If an insider is in possession of UPSI and he makes a trade, will it be assumed that the basis of the trade of the insider trading trade is insider information, or will he be given an opportunity to show that he acted on some other legitimate information? So the starting point will always be that it will always be presumed that you acted on the basis of information that is UPSI. So the onus completely lies on the person executing that trade to prove otherwise. So there are two ways of doing it. One is you prove that there was no way you could have relied, but the ball is in your court. If you're the one executing the trade, the ball is in your court to prove that you were not the one, you hadn't relied on UPSI. Or the second is a simpler method. If, for example, it's a pledge or it's any one of those permitted transactions which you can undertake with a pre-clearance, then you go ahead and say, look, you know, I did it with a pre-clearance and here is the pre-clearance. So that's how it will work. But yes, to answer your question, the presumption will always, always, always be that you have traded on the basis of UPSI. Okay. Against whom will the burden of proof lie in the case of an allegation of insider trade? Now, the starting presumption is always that you have traded on the basis of UPSI, right? But where it is a deemed insider, right? I, as the person making the allegation, will need to prove it. So if it is an insider, someone who's directly associated, the assumption is that they traded on the basis of insider UPSI, and where it is a deemed insider, onus is on me to prove that, or the person making the allegation to prove that they actually did trade on the basis of UPSI. Now, whether the decision by an investment company to sell its shareholding in a company and subsequent sale would amount to PSI that needs to be disclosed to the public. If yes, whether trading in securities of the FC. Okay, so I am not going to get into the case specific details, but generally to answer the question, we go back to the definition of what constitutes UPSI, right? Now, sale of a undertaking or sale of shareholding. Now, if it is like, you know, if you are something like, again, I keep coming back to this name, but if you are like a Hindustan Unilever with some 20 companies inside you and a separate prop desk which keeps making investments, treasury investments, then, you know, you are selling shares which is not going to move the needle for your company in any material way, in the sense that when it becomes that information, when it becomes generally available, will not materially change the price of your securities, then no. But otherwise, yeah. So it really depends on the facts of the case. It has to be, there can be no, because it really depends on what will move the price of the securities, right? But you have the thumb rule is you go back to the definition of UPSI, you go back to the facts of the situation to see whether or not like you fulfill and how much you fulfill the definition and you take it from there, right? I think we covered the UPSI in great detail.
I think we've covered a lot already.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. If there is anything else that you'd like answered, I mean, perhaps I could take it offline.